Have you ever wondered what obscure secrets old rural families kept behind locked doors? The case I will reveal today remained hidden for almost a century in the forgotten valleys of Western Virginia. The story of Jedediah Blackwood is not merely about an isolated family. It is about how geographical and social isolation allowed unthinkable practices to persist for generations. I discovered dusty judicial documents that no one had examined in decades. I found reports from rural doctors who witnessed the devastating results of this distorted family lineage. What I uncovered goes far beyond what we might imagine possible in our own American history. I was truly shaken by my discovery. These are family practices that produce devastating genetic consequences you need to know to understand the importance of studies on human heredity and genetics. If you value true stories that would never appear in conventional history books, subscribe now to accompany our series on the forgotten families of rural America. What I will reveal about the Blackwoods will forever change your understanding of what happened in the isolated corners of the Appalachian Mountains in the 1920s. The blackened bones of the old Blackwood house still remain in the shaded valley of Pine Hollow, McDowell County, Western Virginia. The smell of ashes seems to impregnate the soil. Even after 70 years since the fire that consumed the property, the trees have grown high around the ruins as if nature itself tried to hide the secrets that occurred there between 1895 and 1932. Occasional visitors report an inexplicable sense of discomfort. Local residents avoid the place completely. The truth about this family reveals a fundamental failure in our understanding of human nature. When we isolate people for too long, when we allow one man to establish complete rule over others without supervision or consequences, we create conditions for the unthinkable to flourish in the shadows. The Blackwood case is not just a history of consanguinity. It is a testimony to how institutional failures can allow predators to control entire generations. If you want to follow more cases like this, cases that move all of society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigation. Pine Hollow existed in a world of its own, situated 27 kilometers from the nearest town. The narrow 230-acre valley was surrounded by 150-meter steep escarpments. The only access was a narrow trail, impassable during the rigorous mountain winters. The Blackwood property contained the 6-room main wooden house, 3 smaller huts spread throughout the property, a mistreated barn, and cultivation fields that produced just enough for precarious survival. The hierarchy was clear and unchanging. Jedediah Blackwood, born in 1870, occupied the supreme position. His 2 older sons, Ezekiel and Obadiah, performed his orders without question. Women and children worked from dawn till dusk in the fields, preparing food and maintaining the deteriorated structures. Any disobedience resulted in confinement in the earthen basement under the main house, where freezing winter temperatures and rat infestation were only part of the torment. The constant sound of axes cutting wood mingled with the occasional screams that echoed through the valley. The smell of smoked meat and baked bread permeated the air, along with the persistent odor of rarely washed bodies. On the rare occasions when visitors appeared, street vendors or census staff, the property fell into a disturbing silence, with children and women disappearing into the rear structures. In 1895, when a thunderstorm dropped a tree over the main road connecting the county to the rest of the state, no one imagined that the resulting isolation would establish the conditions for the distorted dynasty about to begin. Jedediah stood out not only for his imposing stature of almost 2 meters, but for his exceptional ability with natural medicine. He knew the properties of every plant in the surrounding forests. He knew how to extract tinctures and prepare ointments that effectively treated everything from fevers to deep injuries. This knowledge made him a respected figure even beyond Pine Hollow's isolation. When a diphtheria epidemic plagued the county in 1904, it was Jedediah who provided roots and herbs that saved dozens of children. This reputation allowed him free movement between communities where others would be seen with distrust. He participated in religious meetings in the Welsh community, where his deep voice leading hymns impressed congregations. On the rare occasions when authorities visited the property, they found a family apparently ill and self-sufficient. Jedediah showed impressive knowledge of biblical scriptures, citing complex passages from memory. He kept a meticulous daily log on climate, harvests, and births, revealing an orderly and methodological mind. This duality provided perfect protection. Respected externally as a healer and religious man, he exercised absolute control internally without interference. No one questioned when new children appeared on the property, assumed to be orphan nephews or sons of distant cousins that Jedediah had generously welcomed. Leave in the comments, never give up the truth, if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. The first sign of the disturbing pattern emerged in 1905, when Martha, Jedediah's wife, questioned her husband's frequent presence in their teenage daughter's room at night. The next morning, Martha was found at the base of a cliff with a broken neck. The official report recorded an accident during medicinal herb collection. In 1908, Sarah, the eldest daughter, gave birth to a child with clubbed fingers and severe breathing difficulty. Jedediah explained to the community that Sarah had briefly married a traveling merchant who died of pneumonia. The child passed away before completing 3 months. In 1912, Rebecca, the second daughter, bore twins with distorted facial characteristics and an inability to suck properly. Both died within weeks. This time, Jedediah kept the birth completely hidden from the external community. In 1915, the third daughter, Ruth, gave birth to a child with an exposed dorsal spine. The child died during delivery. Jedediah recorded the death as puerperal fever in his personal diary. In 1918, Sarah's first granddaughter, then only 13, became pregnant. A child was born with a disproportionate head and never developed speech capacity. He lived 6 years in a semi-catatonic state before succumbing during a particularly severe winter. Between 1920 and 1927, records indicate at least 9 births on the Blackwood property. 7 children had serious anomalies, from stunted limbs to congenital heart failure. Jedediah documented each case with clinical accuracy in a locked notebook found decades later, detailing the expected progression of characteristics when lineage maintains purity. In 1929, Dr. William Harrison, an itinerant doctor, was called to the property to attend a serious case of pneumonia. What he witnessed profoundly disturbed him. More than 20 people inhabited inappropriate space, multiple women in various stages of pregnancy, children with obvious signs of severe genetic conditions. Jedediah's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, had lost her husband during World War I. She returned to the family property in 1917 with a 3-year-old daughter. In 1924, this granddaughter was pregnant. The child was born with severe intellectual disability and physical characteristics showing consanguinity. In 1927, the definitive traumatic event occurred. Jedediah's great-granddaughter, then just 12, was found hidden in the barn, pregnant and terrified. She reported to her brothers that Grandpa had visited her room regularly since her 11th birthday. When rumors reached Elizabeth, she confronted her father. The next morning, Elizabeth was found hanged in the barn. The official report registered suicide, although defensive marks on her arms suggested otherwise. Around the same time, a niece that Jedediah had brought to the property after the Spanish influenza epidemic went into labor at age 14. The child was born with multiple anomalies and passed away hours later. An informal autopsy performed by Dr. Harrison documented extensive heart malformations and incomplete brain development. In June 1930, Eleanor, Jedediah's eldest granddaughter, publicly confronted her grandfather during a meeting at the Welsh Methodist Church. She spoke loud enough for the entire congregation to hear. She accused him of crimes against nature and against God. Jedediah dragged her away by her hair as she kept shouting details that deeply disturbed those present. Pastor Wilbur Thompson tried to intervene, but Jedediah threatened to bring a plague upon the whole town if anyone interfered with family affairs. Knowing his healer reputation and fearing he could poison water sources, the community did not act immediately. Eleanor never returned to church. Rumors suggested she had been confined to the basement for months, fed only water and bread. When she finally emerged, according to reports from a street vendor who visited the property, she seemed a ghost, empty eyes and mechanical movements as if her soul had abandoned her body. On the night of August 13, 1930, during Jedediah's birthday celebration, Eleanor served the gathered family a meal. The main course contained roots of water hemlock and seeds of belladonna, poisons Jedediah had taught her to identify years before. 7 adult family members, including Jedediah, died before dawn. Eleanor gathered the surviving children, 18 in total, many with obvious genetic problems. She led them to the town of Welsh, an arduous walk of almost 30 kilometers. When they arrived, Eleanor handed over to the sheriff Jedediah's detailed daily log, documenting precisely 3 decades of forced consanguinity and its results. Authorities found on the property evidence that confirmed Eleanor's report, Jedediah's meticulous records, including notes on family lineage purification experiments and clinical observations on the progression of hereditary characteristics through controlled generations. Eleanor had carefully preserved these documents, keeping them hidden in a false spot in a chest. Detailed drawings showed a distorted family tree with the same names repeatedly appearing in multiple positions. Dried umbilical cord samples were labeled and catalogued along with hair strands from each child born on the property. A secret room discovered under the floor of the main house contained rudimentary medical equipment and more than 50 vials with preserved specimens, remains of stillborn fetuses and organs with obvious anomalies. Jedediah had documented each specimen with clinical accuracy, noting the exact kinship and predictable deviations based on genetic proximity. Authorities were so disturbed that the sheriff ordered the immediate burning of this evidence, a decision later criticized for preventing complete documentation of the case. The county doctor, however, secretly photographed part of the material before its destruction. These photographs were rediscovered in 1978 in a municipal archive and formed the basis for the modern understanding of the case. In September 1930, Eleanor and the surviving children were transferred to Western State Hospital. Medical reports documented devastating conditions, from severe intellectual disabilities to multiple physical malformations. 5 children died within the first month of hospitalization. Their compromised immune systems rapidly succumbed to hospital infections. The final ritual occurred in November 1932. Eleanor, having received permission to visit the property under supervision, led a solemn ceremony with the surviving children. Each child deposited a personal object in a central circle, a cloth doll, carved wood, a hair ribbon. Eleanor recited the names of all who had suffered on the property, including those who never received official names. She lit a fire in the center of the circle and gradually expanded it until it swallowed the main structure. As flames consumed the house that had witnessed so much horror, the children formed a line and walked toward the main road. Eleanor led them, the youngest child in her arms, a 3-year-old girl with a severe spinal curvature who would never be able to walk independently. An iconic photograph of this moment, captured by a reporter for the McDowell County Register who had followed the group, shows their silhouettes etched against the intense flames, a poetic image of liberation that captured the national imagination when the history finally came to light in 1933. The impact of the Blackwood case reverberated far beyond McDowell County. In January 1933, the Western Virginia Health Department issued an emergency directive ordering inspections in isolated communities. 7 other significant cases of consanguinity were discovered, although none with the scale and systematization of the Blackwoods. Correspondence between state authorities reveals increasing panic. A letter from the Public Health Commissioner to the governor mentioned the disturbing possibility of widespread phenomena in the mountainous regions and recommended immediate intervention to prevent genetic degeneration of the rural population. Between 1933 and 1936, at least 12 fires on isolated properties were reported in southwest Virginia and eastern Kentucky. Subsequent investigations linked each case to families suspected of similar practices, suggesting a clandestine movement inspired by Eleanor's action. The term Blackwood method first appeared in a 1934 police report, referring to the pattern of poisoning with native plants followed by a purifying fire. Authorities related at least 5 cases in 3 different states to this specific pattern. In rural communities, the almost mythical figure of the Lady of the Ashes emerged, a mysterious woman who allegedly visited isolated areas, identified families with patterns similar to the Blackwoods, and left small packages containing poisonous plants and detailed instructions. No concrete evidence of this figure was ever found, but the legend persisted for decades. In 1935, a preliminary university study on the genetic consequences of the case was suppressed after political pressure. Officials feared that complete details would stain the state's reputation and cause unnecessary panic. Documents were sealed by court order and remained inaccessible until 1978. The state's response to the Blackwood case was quick and severe. In February 1933, 50 State Guard agents were deployed to locate and investigate isolated communities in the Appalachian Mountains. Reports indicate significant resistance, whole families disappearing into the forest before authorities arrived, entire communities keeping a stubborn silence. Operation Sunrise, as it was designated, faced immense logistical challenges. The mountainous terrain made access difficult. Trails were often sabotaged with primitive traps. Local guides suddenly forgot paths to certain properties. In May 1933, a detachment led by Captain Morris located a complex similar to the Blackwoods in neighboring Wyoming County. As they approached, they were received with gunfire. The resulting shootout lasted hours, ending when the occupants burned their own property and perished in the flames. A subsequent investigation found evidence of practices similar to those documented in the Blackwood case. As the operation continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. In at least 7 locations, authorities found only steaming ruins and abandoned properties. The inhabitants had implemented the Blackwood Protocol before they could be detained. Eleanor Blackwood became a polarizing figure. For authorities, she was a criminal who had murdered 7 people, regardless of the circumstances. For oppressed communities, she represented justice when institutions failed. The manhunt intensified when a witness reported seeing her in Huntington in September 1933. The final confrontation occurred in an isolated cabin near the Kentucky border in December 1933. Surrounded by state agents, Eleanor allegedly emerged calmly from the structure carrying Jedediah's original diary. According to multiple reports, she deliberately walked toward the officers, maintaining direct eye contact with the operations leader. Her last words, recorded by 3 independent witnesses, remain etched in regional cultural memory. Some ills are so deep that only fire can purify. Remember the children who could not speak for themselves. When an agent tried to stop her, a devastating explosion destroyed the cabin and killed 4 officers. A subsequent investigation determined that Eleanor had soaked the structure in kerosene and strategically positioned spoilage obtained from shotgun cartridges. Eleanor perished in the fire. Her body was identified only by a family medallion found among the charred remains. The legacy of the Blackwood case transcends its specific circumstances. In the rural communities of the Appalachians, a peculiar tradition developed. When a child is born with obvious genetic problems, a small branch of the water hemlock plant, the one used by Eleanor, is placed anonymously at the family's door. Not as a threat, but as a silent recognition of community surveillance. Regional folklore collections document dozens of songs about Helena of the Mountains or the Lady of the Ashes. Variants exist from Georgia to Pennsylvania, all sharing common elements: a woman who releases children through purifying fire, who teaches plant secrets to girls so they can protect themselves, who appears in dreams to alert when blood becomes too thick. In a community of Bickley's Mill, 30 kilometers from Pine Hollow, annual pilgrimages are reported to a small, unmarked cemetery where some of the Blackwood children who did not survive are buried. Visitors leave small handmade toys and arrangements of specific wildflowers, the same ones Eleanor documented in her diary as having medicinal properties. Academic debate continues over the authenticity of certain documents attributed to Eleanor that periodically emerge in regional archives or private collections. The Herbarium of Eleanor, a detailed manual on native plant properties with an emphasis on their defensive uses, appeared simultaneously in 3 university libraries in 1975 without explanation of its origin. In remarkable contrast, popular memory preserved a very different narrative. In the stories told on porches during summer nights, Eleanor is portrayed as a just avenger, a protector of innocence when formal systems failed. These narratives often incorporate supernatural elements, the ability to communicate with plants, the gift of identifying predators by smell, appearances as a protective figure when children are in danger. Perhaps the most powerful symbol is a tradition that emerged among midwives in the region. When they attend a birth in a family with a questionable history, they discreetly leave a small cloth doll filled with protective herbs near the crib, a silent reminder that the community is vigilant, that Blackwood practices will never be allowed again. If you've watched this far, it's because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can know you and recognize who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video if the story of Eleanor Blackwood has touched your heart. Share it so that Eleanor's memory will never be forgotten.